Hello, 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 and welcome back to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. I am so happy to have you here with me today. Many parents see themselves in their children. There was a man whose daughter was diagnosed with ADHD who reached out for his own evaluation because he realized that he had similar issues as his child. He would leave the remote in the refrigerator, would often forget his keys, was chronically late for appointments, would leave the stove on, and always appeared frazzled. He, like many parents and adults with ADHD, spent his whole life feeling like something was wrong with him, and he had a low opinion of himself. And he did, in fact, have an undiagnosed ADHD that was diagnosed in adulthood. Today, I thought it would be important to discuss what it's like parenting when you yourself have ADHD and what strategies are helpful for navigating the parent and life journey. My guest today is Holly Blanc Moses, a licensed clinical mental health counselor, host of the Autism ADHD Podcast, and a Child Nexus friend and colleague. She has over 23 years of experience in ADHD, autism, and anxiety, and has been supporting neurodivergent children and families for over 23 years.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Holly, thank you so much for joining me again on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I love to talk with you.
I love speaking with you too. And I was looking back and it seemed like you were here a while back. And at that time we were talking about supporting youth who have ADHD and who are also autistic. And that was episode 78, which is, I think we're now on episode 150. And so glad to have you back. Sorry it took so long. And today we're discussing a completely different topic.
Yes, we are going to talk about this whole parenting thing when you have ADHD yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I wanted to have you on this podcast to talk about this subject. In the intro, I talked about the fact that many parents also realized during the process of an assessment that they have a lot of the same characteristics and struggles or had when they were kids that they are seeing in their kids currently. And they're realizing, I may have ADHD as well. I mean, it's 1 in 5 people, depending on the research, 1 in 5 to 1 in 10, but there's a good likelihood that that could be the case. And I listened to your podcast episode when you discussed your invisible struggle with ADHD and your late diagnosis. And it was such a vulnerable episode. I'm so glad that you did it because there are so many parents, so many adults who've had similar experiences that you have had, and realizing that they have ADHD and they have not come to this realization until later in life.
It's true. And thank you for that. I appreciate it. For those of you who are interested in hearing that episode, I am the host of the Autism ADHD Podcast, and I talked about that, and it was vulnerable. It was actually pretty hard for me to do it, but I do think that that's how we learn and move forward, when we're real and vulnerable with each other. And then we can have an idea of what our kids might be going through. And I didn't know that until this year. I knew I struggled, but I didn't know why. And, Karen, when I think back, it all makes so much sense now. When I was in school and we had lockers back in the day, and I was the only kid who was always in the main office on a long weekend or over a holiday. The first day back, I could never remember that locker number. And they kept telling me, like, Holly, I don't get why you have to keep coming in here. I'm like, I don't know either. It's not like I wanted to hang out.
Right.
and do that. And they would tell me to write it down, and I would, and I'd lose it. And, I do remember just really struggling with, not understanding instructions sometimes, or, there would be assumptions that I would know what to do in school, what the expectation was. And I didn't want to ask because I was too scared of what, the other students might think of me. And so then we start to build in those foundational default thoughts, right? Like I'm not smart. Why is everything so hard for me? I also struggled socially. And again, kind of putting that on myself that, I was bad at it. Like maybe, I was too weird or annoying or whatever, right? I was too much, basically. And so I had this idea in my head about, they invited me somewhere and I go with them, and maybe I'm a part of a group for a short amount of time, and then they start getting together without me. And, those things really led to feelings of, depression and anxiety. And back then, I'll be 49 this year. Back then, you didn't think that, right? Like nobody knew about ADHD. If they did, it was more about this, jumping around boy.
Right.
I had no idea.
And that's absolutely it, because we know that, for many adults with ADHD whose symptoms were overlooked, it's really hard. And oftentimes when I'm seeing them presenting as adults, they're presenting with anxiety, they're presenting with depression. And then when you go through the history, then you realize, there were all of these kind of clues and red flags, but no one had really connected the dots before. And it can lead to some of the things that you talked about. It can lead to, parents will say, frustration, chronic stress, low self-esteem and anxiety and depression as well. And a lot of people as adults are coming in for concerns about that. And then again, like I said, you dig into the history and you realize that there were these kind of undiagnosed issues that were there the whole time. And for women, we know that the symptoms look different in girls and women than they do in boys and men, like you were alluding to. And they are more likely to be overlooked because they're so good at compensating. They're so good at masking and camouflaging and really working twice as hard, 3 times as hard, 10 times as hard to overcome their struggles.
And it's, exhausting.
It's exhausting.
Absolutely exhausting. And I just remember, I can't remember if I talked about this in the episode I did on my podcast, but I just remember it was so hard for me to keep my room clean. Like I would just cry because I was in trouble all of the time because I just couldn't do it. I tried so hard, Karen, so hard. And I would be so happy. I remember one day I got the top of one of my dressers cleaned off. And I was thrilled. I felt so good. It was so much effort for me. And all I got was, what about the rest of the room? Right. And so, I feel like how wonderful we're doing this interview today, right? We're learning more about what ADHD looks like. And it doesn't maybe look how we thought it looked. And all these people are going undiagnosed. And while they are, the thoughts about them being broken, like I thought that, like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I be like other people? I wish I could do this. And really what those roll into is an I'm not good enough story.
Right. That's so true. And that's a story that many adults with undiagnosed ADHD or undiagnosed other neurodivergent presentations will talk about. And you are a licensed psychology associate. You're a licensed clinical mental health professional. You are an ADHD certified clinical services provider, and you have decades of experience working with families who have kids with ADHD, autism, and anxiety. And if you were only recently diagnosed, imagine all of the parents who have similar experiences that you do. What led you to seek out an evaluation? having had those experiences for so long and having worked in this space for so long and having helped so many other parents who were managing their kids' struggles.
Yeah. And, it was interesting because it's like, hello, Holly. How'd you miss this one? Well, of course, I was always drawn to neurodivergent people, and their families. And of course, that makes sense because that's who I'm most comfortable with. But it was actually during, and it's a funny story, it was during a huge virtual event that I was putting on, the ADHD Summit. And I was interviewing two psychologists, two women who were diagnosed later. And the way they were describing their history, I just said, before we started recording, I said, that really, really sounds like me. And one of them said, which one of your parents has ADHD? And all of a sudden it just came out, my dad, without even thinking about it. Because he, the rest of the dads had sort of like these same old jobs they had until they retired. That's kind of what it was like when I was growing up. And my dad didn't. Like, he was kind of all over the place. He was building businesses and then starting new businesses, and he was bored all the time and he had to be busy. And, he wasn't like other dads. My sister, my youngest sister, was also diagnosed with ADHD, probably 15 years ago. And so it really just all fell into place. And it was that moment, right? Like, sometimes you hear things over and over again, but it's that moment from that person that it kind of clicks, right? Well, and how funny is that, running a huge ADHD summit and that happens. So that led me to find a physician, actually is a psychiatrist who specializes in women in ADHD. And she did a very thorough assessment. And she said, yes, 100% sure that you meet criteria. And really, it was probably one of the most wonderful days of my life.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to ask you next, is how was it realizing that you met criteria for ADHD? You've had ADHD this whole time, because for many adults whose ADHD symptoms were overlooked, getting a diagnosis is kind of validation and relief. And I'm wondering what that experience was like for you.
I think the word relief is the best one to use, because my struggles weren't because I was bad or that, I wasn't good enough. It was my makeup. It was my neurology. And that's not bad either, right? And looking at it in a completely new way is no wonder I struggle to do this. And maybe I have, look at it and say, this all makes sense now. And I am not too much. I just have certain ways of doing things. There are going to be people I match with and people I don't. So not taking that personally. And really understanding why I was able to succeed as well as I did is because I just dove headfirst into my interest, which was supporting neurodivergent people. And I don't get distracted. I don't get overwhelmed. It's my jam, right? It's the other things that are so hard. And I love that it makes so much sense, because we want to support our kids' interest, whether they meet criteria for ADHD, whether they meet criteria for autism, or both, really supporting that, because that's where they're going to really shine and love what they do. Because when I am in a session with a client, I am 100% present. I am 100% in. When I'm doing other things like admin work or running my group private practice, those are hard things, those admin things, those things that don't light me up. But it really is overwhelmingly, I would say, a relief.
Yes. And like I said, that's the experience that many parents have, because again, particularly when you've struggled for so long, it gives validity to your experience. And it's not some internal, lack of motivation or a lack of willingness or not caring. It is a difference in the way that your brain is wired that has contributed to the struggles you've had and made it so hard for people to navigate their daily experiences. Did you notice that your ADHD had impacted your parenting, kind of like looking back? Because I know so many parents will say once they get a report about their kid's ADHD, they feel like, oh my goodness, I believe I also have ADHD. How am I then going to navigate my child's ADHD if I don't have my own under control?
I love that question. It's interesting because when I look back and I think when it was just me, okay, this single person and kind of all the things that I tried to do, I literally had filing cabinets with ways I would try to organize and tons of Post-it notes and all of those things. I really tried so hard. And things that I would do, I'm sure I've not been tested, but I'm sure there are definitely processing and working memory differences, definitely visual things happening for me. I would have to draw out maps to kind of be able to figure out where I'm going. I really have hard time picturing space in my mind, if that makes sense. So I really, really worked hard to do what I needed to do when I was by myself. So imagine then adding on a husband, right?
Right.
And then and he also has ADHD, by the way. And so kind of adding on that responsibility, and what does that mean? Exactly. So then you're organizing not only the daily life, like the finances and scheduling and work stuff. And as you know already about me, Karen, I have some pretty significant health problems. So, I'm at the doctor at least twice a week. And I've been sick since I was 18. So it's really trying to navigate all of these things. So because of those health problems, I wasn't able to have kids myself. And so we adopted through foster care. And both of our kids are neurodivergent and both have ADHD. Our oldest is also autistic. And they both have learning differences. So I was sort of managing when I was on my own, and then adding a partner, and then adding two kids who also have ADHD and trying to navigate all of their appointments. Because when you are a parent of neurodivergent kids, you're not talking about meeting the teacher once a quarter or once a year, right? I mean, these are daily emails, daily phone calls. They're, occupational therapy, they're tutoring, they're all the things, right? They're therapies. It's so much that sometimes you feel like, or I should own that when I say it, sometimes I feel so overwhelmed. And that comparison sets in. Well, all these other people seem to be able to do it. And then that default happens where it's like, well, if I was better at, I should be more organized. I should be this, should be that. And I do think that it's been a really long road for me. And being able to see that it's okay that I can't manage everything perfectly all the time. I do struggle with perfectionism. And I think a lot of, especially women with ADHD, struggle with that as well, because we had to work so hard to be accepted or to feel like we weren't bad or, trying to avoid being criticized. So then we need to be perfect.
Right.
But then you add on all the things when you've got 5,000 things, literally, it feels
right.
like sometimes literally what I do, 5,000 things on my plate. It's really hard to juggle.
Right. And many women who, I've interacted with who have ADHD, who are diagnosed later in life, describe what you've described. It's that executive functioning load. As that increases, then they start to see the struggles get worse. It's like, okay, it was hard to navigate in high school. It became harder in college because you added the financial responsibility, managing your own time, getting yourself up in the morning, navigating classes. And then then they were doing fine in a job where there was an interest. Again, we know that individuals with ADHD do well on preferred tasks and in doing things that they enjoy, but have struggled with those non-preferred tasks. And then you add, like you're saying, a spouse and children, and now they're having to manage their own lives and the lives of other human beings. And that executive functioning load, that increase contributes to the feelings of overwhelm, right? And then individuals who feel like they have to overcome those obstacles and have to power through and be exceptional can create and contribute to some of that anxiety that many people with ADHD feel.
It's so true. And I know that the parents with ADHD listening right now are going to definitely understand.
Yes. They're going to be nodding their heads.
I thought, oh, if I have a super pretty calendar, that's going to make the difference, right? So I'm going to carry this big old thing around with me every single day, put my back out trying to get this thing around, never open it, right? I mean, so it's like all these things that we've tried. And right now, everyone can't see this, but I have got so many messy Post-it notes right now on my desk. I've got this desk calendar thing that I just came up with, this idea that I thought I would write 3 things on every day. So I think we have to just kind of be patient with ourselves and feel like, how do we make this work? And also not to beat ourselves up. There are things that we have to really look at and be okay with not getting done.
Right. Right. And that self-compassion piece is so important, right? And as an adult with ADHD, Holly, and a professional that teaches parents and professionals strategies for managing their kids' behavior and social skills, what guidance do you have for neurodivergent parents? And it sounds like you've got some strategies already. The calendar helps. But then again, I think that self-compassion piece is so important.
It really is. And it's something when you think, especially those diagnosed later, all of those years that you've been telling yourself that you weren't good enough or you should be able to, all those things, right? Is looking at that in a different way. And what a beautiful opportunity as we are learning that self-compassion to turn around and support our kids so they don't have to be as old as we are before we start learning to love ourselves as we are. And I also feel like it's okay to communicate when it's too much. I think that especially women, like we take on so much and we feel like we can't say that it's too much for some reason. I'm glad things are getting better in that area. But being able to say no, I really struggle with that. And I still do, but I'm working on it. And I also think, Karen, of kind of like I have so many popsicle sticks, for instance, like I use this visual, right? I have so many popsicle sticks for the day. Where am I going to put them? Where am I going to put them? Like how much energy something will take, or I only have one more popsicle stick and I'd rather hang with my kid and talk to my spouse and maybe wipe the kitchen table. I don't have another one to vacuum, so I'm not doing it.
And have to be okay with that.
And have to be okay with that. And that does not make you bad. That does not make you less. And guess what, Karen? My dresser is a mess. It is. And that's okay.
And I think it gives you a different perspective too in understanding neurodivergent kids. And because you can literally put yourself in their shoes because you've had similar experiences, which makes you really a standout in the field because you can really, not only do you have the knowledge and the skills to really help parents navigate their own experiences, but you also have bring your own experience into that as well. So it gives you that empathy piece that a lot of professionals who don't have that background can't bring into their relationship with parents.
Yeah. I'm honored to be able to support the people I do. They're the most lovely people you'll ever meet. And, looking at supporting kids and families also as a team, right? Like educators are coming together, the therapists are coming together, the parents and how they're feeling about themselves, and then also maybe expectations they feel like society has for them, right? And really being able to tune in and be more self-aware. For instance, so many people posting like graduation, photos on Facebook, things like that. And my kid's not, maybe he's that age, but he's not there. And that's okay. Right. And really being able to step back and say, it doesn't have to look one way. It just has to work for me and my family. And also, I think with that social piece and being accepted, that, be okay with who you are and who your family is, and you'll find your matches. Don't try to be something that you're not, because we also don't want to model that for our kids. We want them to be accepted for who they are, but we also have to recognize that it's okay to be accepting of who we are.
Absolutely. I think that is so important. And that also brings to mind that so many parents, want their kids to be okay. They want to jump in and provide their kids with all the support that they need in order to thrive. And oftentimes, those same parents forget about themselves and taking care of themselves, whether that's self-care, whether that's seeking an evaluation, whether that's getting treatment for your own anxiety, depression, or other challenges. I think that's an important piece as well, because we know that there are cognitive behavioral therapy programs, that there are professionals like yourself who work with individuals with ADHD. And we know that, understanding what ADHD is, getting support over organizing and planning and prioritizing and getting started on tasks and chunking routines and all of that can be helpful. Mindfulness can be helpful. And so I think it's so important for parents to not only seek support for their kids, as they're navigating OT, occupational therapy and speech therapy and their kids' own therapies, but make sure that if you need it as a parent, that you are also seeking support for yourself.
No, I love that. And I feel like sometimes for people with ADHD, I know for me as well, that when they're told to take care of themselves, it's like, oh, that's one more thing that
Exactly.
That feels like overwhelming. It's like, oh my goodness, one more thing I have to do. But acknowledge that first thought. Like, that's okay. All thoughts and feelings are okay. Some of them feel better than others. But acknowledging that it can feel overwhelming, but we're not talking about a spa day here, right? Maybe it's taking that one next breath. Maybe it's stretching your arms up and taking just a moment to do that. It doesn't have to be really big, but those small things can make a major impact in your emotional regulation and how you take that next step in your day, how you forgive yourself, how you let yourself be you without the shame and the criticism that you used to just wear so heavily.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wonderful, wonderful advice for so many families, Holly. I cannot thank you enough for being here again. I appreciate your vulnerability. I appreciate you sharing your story, your experience, your skills with our community, our joint community. And I appreciate you being here. If our listeners want to connect with you, how can they get in touch with you?
Yes, thank you so much for that. And thanks for having me back on. I've got some really cool things to give away.
Please share.
I love it. I have so many cool things. And the reason why, because of being a parent of two kids that have a lot going on, I think about what would I want, right? What are my clients asking me for? What are their parents asking me for? And so the Autism ADHD podcast, I think I really dig deep into the backgrounds of things and strategies and and all of the things that you're going to want to know, both as like a parent, those educators, therapists, lots of goodness in there. And then also you're going to have a link below in the show notes to the podcast, but also to a free social skills guide, to a free behavior guide, to a get to know my child guide. I have 2 Facebook groups, one for professionals and one for parents, and it's all down there in the show notes waiting for you. And I can't wait to connect with all of you. I'm so excited.
Wonderful. And thank you so much for sharing that with our listeners, Holly. We will be sure to bold those links in the show notes so people don't overlook them. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Karen. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening today and being part of this conversation. I do want to reiterate that children and adults with ADHD can absolutely thrive. In fact, cognitive behavioral therapy programs that focus on teaching life skills to succeed with ADHD challenges are very effective. Psychoeducation about ADHD, smart goal setting, organizing and planning, prioritizing, distraction control strategies, all can work together with mindfulness and self-compassion to make a big difference. And for many individuals with ADHD, medication can significantly improve symptoms and quality of life. If you enjoyed this episode and learned something new, I'm asking you to give the podcast a 5-star review. This will help me continue bringing you and other families helpful information. Thanks so much for taking the time to give us that review. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.